tomorrow now that works on a lot of these issues. So I'm really happy to be up here on a panel. It's supposed to be a fireside chat, so you kind of imagine a fireplace here. But we wanted to talk about early warnings for all, from forecast to action. So a lot of really neat strategic things have been discussed over the last 2 days about the last mile. I think this session is really about the practical, kind of where the rubber hits the road conversation. So the aim of the session is to explore the real world challenges and innovations in delivering early warning systems to vulnerable communities, ensuring last mile effectiveness and behavioral impact, so that piece as well. So we're looking to share practical experiences in last mile early warning system delivery, and also identify gaps and barriers in community engagement. That's an important factor, and of course, highlight approaches to risk communication, trust, and again, behavior change. So we have a few topics, but before we get to those, let me introduce the panel. I hear this is the biggest panel of the conference, which is great, and we're happy to have everybody here. I'll go down my list. I'm not sure if I have everybody in the exact order, but we have a broad-based group. We'll start by introducing Zablon Shilenje, who's the technical coordinator for services at the WMO Regional Office for Africa. So you must be coming from Addis Ababa, yes? Welcome, Zablon. We have Francis Hoets, the Chief Executive Officer of GMS NPC. And you're local, I believe, right? And this is actually a nice thing about the panel as well, is that we have a lot of folks from South Africa, our hosts, so that's really great for us to learn. We also have Dimpho, Teffo, the National Disaster Management Officer at South African Red Cross. And Tamzin, Hudson, the Operations Manager from Planact, also our local host. And maybe as part of the initial kind of Q&A, some of you all could share a little bit about your organizations and what you're doing, so that we can get to know you. Okay, we have topics ranging from last mile communication to community-based early warning systems to behavioral strategies and impact-based forecasting. So kind of technical and social combined. And what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of raise the topic and ask some kind of questions around that. If we could get one of the panel participants to maybe talk in some level of detail, and perhaps one or other to follow up with any additional thoughts or ideas. I hope that format works for everybody. So we'll start with the last mile communication as sort of a concept, right? So all the downstream services that end up actually connecting with those communities that they're meant to serve. There's a plethora of delivery channels, some of them for early warnings. Some of them work well in certain settings, while others do not. When it comes to, let's say, rural populations or populations that have low literacy, or ones that are ostensibly hard to reach, what channels are used in that context? Again, reaching back to y'all's experience, and how do you build trust in these messages so that they connect and ultimately generate the type of action that we're looking to get from these communities. Could somebody volunteer to go first? I know that's the hardest, but like I got you halfway there. Please.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. This is Zablon from WMO. Good to participate in this discussion, and as you say, communication is key to provision of climate services. The products being generated by producers of climate information needs to get down to the end users to be able to make any impact or significant of use of it. It makes no sense to generate these products and then they don't end up with communities. From my experience and the encouragement we normally provide to the meteorological services is to ensure that they have networks all the way from national level to sub-national level into communities, so that when they generate these services, they are able to link up with the local communities to be able to access their products and services. This could be done through the normal government structure, dissemination of information through the administration processes that eventually ends up with the local communities. But it could also be done through a network of civil organization, a network of communities, communication channels, the local community communication channels, even through institutions like religious groups, opinion leaders at community levels. When they are brought into the discussions around communication and dissemination of climate services, this will play a role in providing this information down to the locals. But there's one thing I would also like to mention about provision of these services is where this information comes from, to be able to create trust among the users of the information. In Africa of late, I have noticed an entry of a number of players who are providing this information, and we really need to safeguard the national role of the authoritative voice of providing this information at the national level. Let this information come from the recognized government institutions, and it's good to encourage all other players to join in, but they should provide capacity and support to the national institutions to be able to generate this information. And I think this way, by having a mark of the governments and national entities on the information that is being generated, it will create trust, it will create confidence in the information, and it will also create responsibility. If there are any questions about any of the products being generated, then the government institutions will be able to take responsibility. So I can stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution there. And of course, we have those folks who are at the local and regional level that would probably want to follow on broad-based context you just gave. Please.
I just wanted to add on to what my colleague shared. For South African Red Cross, we have volunteers, so we have a wide range of volunteers in the communities themselves. And what this helps us is that volunteers can go door to door. And for some communities, the old school method is the way to go, because not everyone is has access to digital platforms, has access to radio stations that we sometimes use. So the door-to-door method is sometimes the only reliable way in bridging that gap and disseminating with the communities that we are faced with, especially with the rural and the low-income communities. Thank you.
And maybe just a little bit back to the channels as well, because not only are there literacy issues, in certain cases there are folks with disabilities and various types of limitations as to even receiving information. So maybe also kind of comment back on that.
Good morning, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. So as Planact, we are a development organization. And we work typically with informal settlement communities in 3 different provinces. So they really are our constituency we have a lot of engagement with. So just to start off on the questions that have been asked. From our perspective, I think it's important to ensure that communities are aware of some of the risks and challenges. And many of them, of course, are confronted and are the most vulnerable in the context of hazards and risks. So, but in terms of making preparations and trying to build adaptation and mitigation responses, obviously that requires a very deliberate and dedicated training sessions and approaches. And so we find that in-person workshops are very important, where communities that we bring together can be in workout groups and really discussing solutions and responses and collecting those can be extremely important. We also engage a lot with local government and municipalities, and I think that intersection is one which is really vital. So making local governments aware of these risk and mitigation solutions. So one of the approaches that we use, and I think this in the context of last mile and all responses, is we have at municipal level, we collect a number of informal settlements together into what we call communities of CCAs, so communities of connection and collective action. And so this is really a good way of bringing together or assembling a number of informal settlements in a particular municipality, and then they have a leadership structure. And so, connecting with that leadership is also a good way and would be a very vital way of not only gathering information when there is whether it's a fire or a flood, and then bringing together a number of actors who can then respond. But I think those kinds of approaches and building trust, is vital as well. So we have, because of our credibility and our continued and sustained engagement, we have been able to build trust and, of course, credible information that is vital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sure, I have a lot to say now. I hope I won't take up too much time. I wanted to quote something that was said yesterday from one of the speakers, I think it was DTN, where you said you can have all these jaw-dropping solutions, but unless you listen to the communities, they really are meaningless. What we have found, so I'm from DMS, but also a co-founder of a company called Community Risk Management that we recently started. In all of our years, we have encountered the fact that there's just very little capacity to listen to communities and to engage with them to get that nuanced information that will inform a truly community-based or driven early warning system. Because the reality is we need to view communities as co-producers of risk information and not just receivers or victims in many cases. And when we talk about risk information, we really need to think about what that means. It means understanding what are the hazards that they're facing, what are the conditions of vulnerability or levels of exposure, which are going to ultimately dictate the potential impacts. And your early warnings really need to take all of this into account, but also equally importantly is what is the existing capacity at the community level, because that is where you're going to start to figure out what existing communication channels, for example, are already working and that could potentially be further supported or enhanced. But unfortunately, this type of engagement, it takes time and it takes money. And I know in the South African context, this is incredible. This has been very difficult because I know government is already working within a severely resource-constrained environment. And through our years of working with government and seeing what's happening and not happening, we decided to form community risk management. Which basically, as I said, we view communities as co-producers of risk information, and we are highlighting the importance of real-time data, because this is something that certainly in South Africa we don't have access to. And so what this looks like, it's a fairly innovative solution, and I can say that I haven't seen it being implemented anyway. And some may argue it's fairly ambitious, but we're going to give it a try. Basically, we are, as a non-profit company franchise model. The idea is we made a decision very early on that we would not be relying on government funding or grant funding, and it would have to be a self-sustainable business plan at the community level. And so what we're doing is we've developed a blended funding approach where we've got some really innovative revenue streams lined up. And what we do is we recruit and appoint community risk management marshals in high-risk communities. And their primary mandate is to develop and maintain community-based early warning systems. So their job is literally going to be, will include data collection at a household level, going household to household and collecting information on the hazards, the conditions of vulnerability and available capacity. And that information is going to be used to inform whatever multi-hazard early warning would be appropriate to that area. But also importantly, that data is going to be invaluable to decision makers, whether you are from the public sector or the private sector, that will not only support early warnings, but also disaster risk reduction in general. So really what I wanted to say is that we can suggest lots of different options for communication, and there really are many great, innovative, highly technical, and also very basic. But at the end of the day, it's purely dependent on the community and what they say they trust, they need, and that they are capable of actually using to be able to take action on. So yeah, thanks.
Amazing. Before we kind of switch topics, I'm wondering, Francis, in Malawi, do we have some examples of like community-based early warning systems? Maybe the work that's being done in Lake Malawi, anything that kind of comes to mind?
Oh, yes. Good morning. My name is already stated. My name is Francis. From Malawi Meteorological Services. I am heading the engineering section. Much has been discussed, but in Malawi, practically on the ground, we have had various issues concerning the building up of the trust among the community, and it posed as a threat because previously we had problems with our dissemination systems. The focus that were being produced previously, a long time ago, were not accurate. Now, the first thing that Malawi did was to modernize the climate information. How we did that was by making sure that we had advanced technologies, automated weather stations, hydro stations, lake-based weather buoys, and lighted detection systems. And then after that, it was resulted in accuracy weather forecast that now brought about our visibility in the country. Was previously it was difficult for the communities, the local communities, to be aware of what we were there for. So after this, then we tried to connect with our other government sectors like the agriculture sector, fisheries, disaster, and many more. And then we targeted the local authorities within the country and taking advantage of the already existing local structures within those areas. And what we did, first of all, we had to come up with the awareness campaign throughout Malawi, just to tell our people to understand what the weather is. Unfortunately enough, I would say fortunately, though it was hazardous, there were some developments of those factor cyclones like Anna, Freddy, and Idai, which really caused havoc in our country. And we took advantage of those events to increase our visibility among the communities. And it really worked. And we came up with what we called community-based early warning systems. In short, we just call it simply FUSE. And it really worked because we interacted with the organizations like I've already stated, and including Red Cross. We have the madam from Red Cross here. How we disseminated the information to the local communities was simply interacting with Red Cross, with door-to-door, as it was already been presented. But we also had to come up with trainings with the existing local structures I've already talked about. And we brought up platforms for communication to the local mass now in the fields of fisheries, targeting the fishermen on Lake Malawi, agriculture, targeting our farmers. You know, Malawi is an agro-based country. And the disaster came in as a very important institution for dissemination of the information, mainly in the flood-prone areas. And we procured, it was through M Crimes project, we were able to procure a system that could warn our people in advance before the floods hit. So it's to respond to your question. That's what Malawi has been doing. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much. And we'll come back to the topic of sort of behavioral science and sort of who does what with a warning maybe in a bit, but just to stay with the kind of the infrastructural aspects. There are definitions around what impact-based forecasting is, right? In WMO parlance, what is it? Multi-hazard impact-based forecasting and early warning, right? You have flash flood guidance systems, you have many sort of things that are coming from the global community and are being implemented at national level. So maybe back to Zablon here. Can you kind of give us maybe some definitions or frameworks around these concepts of community-based early warning, of this impact-based forecasting? It's been introduced years ago, but like, where does it stand now in Africa specifically?
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity. Well, in Africa, we are on course of trying to introduce and implement this impact-based forecasting. And merely it means trying to provide climate information with the background of the socio-economic data, the vulnerabilities of the communities, trying to superimpose this data from socio-economic sectors to the forecast, the weather forecasts that are being produced by the main services. We're looking at not how the weather will be tomorrow. That doesn't really provide a lot of impact and action, but what will this weather do to you, so that if you are in those particular areas, you are able to take action, and actually action based on the warning that has been provided. So for impact-based forecasting to be successful, we will need a lot of data from the science, data from the meteorological departments and other relevant departments. But we also need data on vulnerability, as already indicated by one of the panelists here. We will need also to know the mapping in those countries or those particular areas, on areas that can be hit hard, and what will be the economic loss or the economic impact of the extreme events were they to happen when they are forecasted. And then all this, when put together, they will generate the impact-based forecasting. And this is the way to go for most of our main services. We are trying to provide capacity for them to do this. I know in this region, South Africa is playing a big role to support other countries and in other places around Africa. So we will be encouraging the availability of this data, sharing data across various platforms and various agencies for us to achieve this impact-based forecasting. But one of the challenges that is still available, that still needs to be scaled, is the availability of the required human resource to provide this. We need a lot of training and capacity building. I already indicated gaps in data availability and in communicating this forecast once they are already being generated. So in this discussion, we go forward to see how we can be able to improve this going forward. Thank you.
Amazing. So then we have maybe a couple of questions around that. In order to kind of reach scale with all of this, what are like local and regional institutions doing and what tools do they need for these impact-based forecasts to actually reach the scale required in terms of their dissemination? And are there any kind of feedback loops and various ways that communities can crowdsource observations or any other kind of inputs into this whole thing so that it's a more of a back and forth than just a one-way communication? Anybody want to take that? Or any part of that?
Yes, any of my colleagues can take this, but I just wanted to add in terms of the tools you're talking about. I think from the producers of climate information, they will need improved climate models that can be able to speak to very low local communities, high resolution products that can be able to feed into these local communities, targeting particular areas. But I also like to hear to any of the other panelists who would like to have the mic.
I think first we also need to acknowledge the fact that community themselves are first responders in their own disasters. So at Red Cross, what we focus on is capacitating the communities themselves through the volunteers. An interesting example that we had was a simulation exercise that we carried out in Katlehong. It's one of our branches. And what we did there was we simulated an exercise with, I think it was strong winds at the time. And it was believable because at the time the community had just experienced a very strong wind where a lot of the shacks were severely damaged. So what we did was we engaged the community and gave the warning in a local language instead of in English. And what that helped was the fact that the community themselves reacted to the early warning, but more than that, they were also their own first responders. So they started to evacuate themselves in self-made evacuation centers. And I think that shows us that tools exist within the communities. It's just how we leverage them. And you can bring the technical tools, which will help in some regard, but without community buy-in for these tools, you're just imposing a solution on a community. So we leverage the existing tools, the existing indigenous knowledge systems that exist. A lot of the communities leverage their own ecosystem-based knowledge systems, and this has prevented them or it has lessened the impact of disasters in these low income settings. So in that regard, I think as much as we can have the forecast-based tools and the models and the technical solutions, a lot of the indigenous knowledge systems is what we leverage as the South African Red Cross.
Thank Thank you. Just to say that on this question of scaling, we have a number of examples. So I think what's important to also recognize very often is government demand. So for instance, in the city of Tshwane, there was a need to really understand the microclimates in different parts of the city. And so we partnered with World Bank as Planact and a number of other actors. I think it was also under the National Treasury City program. And so in this particular instance, we also used an approach of citizen scientists. So we were able to convene a number of community members from different settlements in the Tshwane region. And we mapped an area of 200 kilometers using vehicle sensors to map the air temperatures. And I think what was really revealing is that we were able to work, we were also working with a partner in the United States who was really doing the data mapping and analysis. And there was actually a 6-degree difference between some of so for instance, the regions of some of the northern parts of the city in relation to the east. And it's actually quite, just I think another interesting point from that study was the impact that trees can have. And so the city in the 60s had engaged in a very significant tree planting campaign in sort of the very wealthy parts of the city. And so that was really where cooling was most significant. And of course, the areas which are very exposed, low vegetation, low greening, obviously much warmer, and of course, differences across. And so this really informed their planning. And so it just shows the impact that communities can play in this partnership model. And I think that's very important in terms of scaling. So you really do need the technical capacity and public-private, and of course, multi-lateral development banks. And just to say another just current project where I think the vital importance of technology and scaling is absolutely essential. So we're doing this an indoor mapping campaign at the moment, also using a technical partner in Belgium, and really installing 150 sensors also in 2 different settlements, 75 in each. And this is really to explore what temperatures are we talking about, and what are those, and what in relation to whether we were to install adaptation technologies, roofing and white paint, for instance, what impact that may have, and so what kinds of responses can be deployed. And so I think it's just vital to have that information, and the importance of profiling again, in terms of really understanding what responses are required for responding. So I think for us, it's very much more putting in place the systems and structures, getting the data, that becomes vital into informing planning and policy responses and retrofitting, and also looking at alternative technologies. There's of course a whole plethora of different building materials and technologies that currently, so I think those all need to be mapped, but using technology is becoming vital in scaling. Thank you.
I wanted to mention on the concept of impact-based early warnings, and just listening to everybody that's been presenting over the last couple of days. And, you know, the recurring theme that has emerged is the challenge of the last mile. Yet when you look at a lot of the presentations that we've heard, a lot of them are still very hazard focused. It's, you know, governance around hazard indicators, it's financing models around, you know, the technology to monitor hazards and so on. And so, especially on the first day, the thought that came to my mind is, to what extent are we including vulnerability decision makers and data custodians in early warning governance structures, in interagency communication and collaboration and so on. If we're really wanting to address last mile and also improve on our impact-based early warnings, we need to start looking at financing models for that data, the impact data and the data on vulnerability, to complement the data that we have on hazards, for example. And we need to bring these, decision makers and different stakeholders to the table and form part of the governance structures, because we cannot actually, I even thought, a bit of a cheeky comment, but like if we look at our session as being separated from the first day's session, whereas, even in these type of formats and forums, there's a potential for a more integrated collaboration and cross-pollination to really give effect to impact-based. And then I just wanted to mention that from a community risk management point of view, we are certainly leveraging off of public-private partnerships for that issue of scale, and particularly bringing in the role of the private sector and really showing how the private sector can actually enhance community resilience by funding these amazing initiatives in very innovative ways. And I'll share one example, and the reason I'm sharing it is because it's also a medium for us to be able to also communicate early warnings. Is we've developed something called a community risk management rewards platform, and this is through a private partnership that we've engaged with, where community members would basically subscribe to an app, which gives them benefits to their grocery stores, like your Checkers and so on. They can get discounts at their KFCs and Nando's. They get free tutoring, 24 hours, and also a nursing line and various other benefits. And they pay R17.99, for example, a month, or about 1,500 rands worth of benefits for that month. And how this works for community risk management is a portion of that $17.99 comes back into the community risk management franchise, which then helps to fund the systems and the equipment and the salaries, and basically becomes one of the sustainable revenue streams. And what's also amazing about it is that you encourage community members to subscribe to this, because in doing so, they're actually investing in their own community risk reduction by doing that. And what's amazing is that through engagement with our partners and knowing now that we've got all these community members engaging with this app, we can also now have push notifications for early warnings going through this app for everybody that's engaging on this platform. So yeah, this is just one of the innovative ways that we're going to be providing revenue to be able to collect that data, as well as to communicate the early warnings. And one of the responsibilities of our community risk management marshals will be to collect data on the impacts, so that we can collect that information, for example, share it with the South African Weather Service and other early warning authorities, so that they can use that information to enhance the accuracy of the impact-based warnings. So yeah, we're really excited about. And just to note, we are very much in our pilot phase. So I don't have a tremendous amount of data and everything that I can share with you now, but we're just excited that we've got some amazing partnerships at national level with the private sector, and we are busy actively piloting this in various places in the country. So yeah, hopefully the next time we meet again, I'll be able to show you some seriously concrete evidence of the success of what we're doing.
Simplicity and translations of the weather forecast has been a major tool that has assisted us to actually have the impact weather forecast based system in Malawi. Just like in other countries, a country would have different type of languages within that country. And in Malawi, we tried to come up with sensitizations and trainings to various tribes in their indigenous languages, so that when we are producing the weather forecast, they are done in those various languages for their easy understanding. And we have seen the impact because whenever you go for an extreme event, you get the feedback either by evacuation, that's one of the feedback that we get, people evacuating, or schools closing. We have seen that each time you come up with a focus of an extreme event, schools closing, and then one of the major industries along the lake Malawi, you will also see a break in their operations. And again, it's easier for schools because they will understand and come up maybe with their own proposing a period of break. But for other areas like the fishing industry, they keep on calling the Met Office and ask when they have resumption of their operations. So as a feedback, we have those kinds of feedbacks from various industries. Thank you.
So great to hear everyone's perspectives on that, and maybe kind of one correlated but really important issue of sort of action upon the warning itself. Hope that woke everybody up. We had we were talking about a range of tools and applications, but kind of it all boils down to, do people act upon all of these tools, and whether that's delivered through a person they know or through an app or whatever, sort of how do we make sure that people take action? And I'll just take a side note to mention, of course, coming from the US, you may have heard there was a really deadly flooding incident in Texas. It's being examined under like a microscope as to kind of what happened, what didn't happen. So I just mentioned the fact that, yes, there was a flood watch. Yes, there was a flood warning. There was a flood emergency issue. All that stuff kind of came out. And then, you have local officials on TV saying, well, I looked at the forecast and went to bed, and that's so there's like no right answer to all of this, but at the end of the day, there are practices that are working in communities that are specific and relevant and probably effective. We would love to hear from the experts on the panel about some of that experience.
Well, thank you again for this question. I'll pass on to my colleagues, but before I do that, I wanted just to say that taking action really is what is required, but is dependent on the communities themselves. Some communities, due to some cultural issues, will react differently as compared to the other communities. But what I think needs to be done, we need to have standard operating procedures developed by governments on how some of these responses could be done in the event that an early warning alert has been issued. If we have standard procedures knowing what organization will do what, how the communities are advised to behave in such a kind of an event when alerts have been generated, this will be good. I know most of the countries have this, but we need to look at them and refine and ensure that they speak to the modern current technologies emerging. So I'd like to pass on to the other for comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I think one thing we have noticed at Red Cross is that ward councillors, traditional councils or traditional leaders in communities are gatekeepers. And as soon as you recognize that, you have to engage with them and give them that respect and the recognition that they deserve, because without that engagement with them, they can revoke access to their communities. So firstly, acknowledging the gatekeepers of the certain community and also being innovative. In one of the communities that we've disseminated in, we use drones. And drone technology is it's very effective, but we found that because the community wasn't exposed to drones before, they acted out of fear, and they took that message that we were disseminating with those drones as the message from the sky. So in that regard, they acted promptly, even though it was out of fear, but it was still urgent. So you still need to be innovative and very sensitive to the context of the community that you're working in. Different tools will result in different reactions. Some communities will act out of fear, but other communities also have community fatigue, and they are more concerned with their bread and butter issues. So not every solution or every approach will warrant the same sort of action or early action from a community, and that also needs to be taken into account. The local actors, as I said, the ward councillors play a very big role, traditional councils, traditional leaders, volunteers, because they are in those communities themselves, will warrant early action. They are engaged with the communities on a daily basis. It's not just someone who comes into the community and leaves. They are situated within those communities. So yes, I touched on technology, the local actors, and the role of the volunteers who are community members themselves, which will warrant an early action from the early warning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think coming back to the issue of trust and trust around data, I think is vital in how communities respond and take action. And so in our case, the role of community leaders is quite vital. And they would then typically set the stage for activating any responses on the ground. But I think also what's important is what's actually currently being done. And we have two particular programs that really demonstrate that almost recognition of that there are problems in the environment, and that things do need to be put in place. And so there's a program called Shilenje that we engaged with, funded by International Budget Partnership, and we work with other organizations. And what's happening currently is concerted action again with the City of Tshwane on solid waste management, because this is a massive issue across informal settlements in the country. And so it's really just through building a strategy and putting in place mechanisms to address sorting at source, recycling, and those kinds of issues. And then, of course, what that's led to is clearance of dumping sites and food gardens. So it's kind of a way of improving the environment, so that and almost in a way preparing the way for response mechanisms to then be inserted in those places. And so I think it really is about providing that recognition that things need to be put in place in advance. Because I'm really, at this stage, while there would be ways of testing, absolute readiness, but I think it's also a lot of urban management that we need to be focusing on. Road infrastructure, for instance, is so precarious that it would be hard to see how even any emergency response vehicles could even go into those places. So I think there's a lot of preparatory work that needs to happen for that to happen. So I think just in terms of taking action, it would have to be through a system that is far more, I think, a little bit more planned and prepared. But it's really making sure that people are aware, I think, this stage from our perspective. Thank you.
So I'm going to take off my community risk management hat and put on my DMS hat. And share with you, especially around this issue of trust. We've done a lot of work in the mining sector since 2016, where one of our biggest clients, identified site-induced emergencies that could potentially impact on communities located in the area of influence. So they brought us on board to assist them to develop community emergency management plans, which is very much centered around a community-based early warning system. So the type of emergencies would include things like, a tailings dam failure, fire, road accidents, things like that, flooding. And one of the things that the mine immediately picked up on was that there was a huge mistrust between the communities and the mine for obvious reasons. And by placing us as a non-profit company in between, we were able to foster a relationship with the communities, which then got them to buy into the whole concept and had them participate. And we've been really privileged to work in this space because a lot of what we have learned there has actually informed the community risk management program itself. And what we've said, we basically recruited and trained community emergency committee members from 14 communities, trained them in disaster management, early warning, and also as first line responders. And the awesome thing is we got to test it. So through the mine, we staged live community evacuation drills for 14 communities. And at any given stage, we were evacuating up to 300 people. Via assembly points to evacuation shelters. And it was an incredible feat. But also it just showed, but one of the biggest challenges that we encountered there is that the mine itself had invested a lot of energy in establishing a relationship with traditional leaders. But when it came to the actual sending out, testing the early warning and the evacuation, we found a lot of community members refused to budge because they didn't acknowledge the traditional leader in question. So we've had to then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what are the other entry points into the community that we can use in order to get greater buy-in from community members and have them participate more? And using that learning, we are putting my community risk management hat back on. We are piloting the community risk management model in Langa informal community in Cape Town. And before we even start anything, what we've done is we've established what we're calling a reference group. And that reference group is, the composition of that is your ward councillor, traditional leaders, trusted organizations, area leaders, block leaders, whatever the case may be, because they're the gatekeepers, obviously. But not only that, we've also established that they are also entry points to a huge communication network, which we can also leverage off of. So, all of them are part of large WhatsApp groups, for example. And so we'll be able to absorb that now as well into the early warning system. But that it just was, without our experience in the mining sector, we would never have known to establish this reference group, and they are going to be driving the establishment of community risk management in the community, ensuring representation of all the vulnerable groups, and ensuring that the gatekeepers are part of the decision making right from the beginning, so we don't have any hiccups. But that's one issue.
Thank you. Much has been discussed, but maybe just a little bit of contribution. Imposing new technologies and systems to communities pose a great threat. But maybe we have to strategize it in the way that we do a lot of awareness campaigns, and each time we are bringing in new things or new technologies towards our people, we need to believe in a system of inclusion. We very much use our local authorities to understand the whole system, and then things will work better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm learning so much right now, and I'm sure others in the room are. And what's also neat is that in this audience, you have a lot of private sector and public sector folks who have been exposed to many programs, both in Africa and globally, and sort of probably have some questions and some things that they would also like to share about the work that they've done elsewhere. So let's please have a dialogue for a while, and then we'll have some closing remarks or anything that you may have missed in the talks that you were giving. Let me hand it over.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for this marvelous discussion. In fact, I'm trying to recall on how we're going to build. I'm from the Meteorological Services, Acting Director of the Mauritius Meteorological Services, just to introduce myself. I'm very much concerned about the impact-based forecasting, and what Zablon says is very important. At very all stages, there should be SOPs. And I'm really impressed by the community-based risk assessment when you're bringing in the drill component there. And this is important. Probably this is what is important for us for the fact that we are currently experiencing extreme events that are going to worsen. We know it already. It is going to worsen, being given the economic policies and the trends that we are heading towards. Mitigating its a big problem, and to me, we have to adapt. And I'm going to take some examples in Mauritius itself. We are prepared, but extreme events are very, very difficult to forecast. And bringing in that component of impact-based forecasting, where we are trying to embark into, we find that this multi-stakeholder approach is very important. Be it from the grassroots level, as you said, community and small, lower level to go up is very important. It has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. And from Mauritius, we had been doing what we call as community disaster response plan, where we train response teams. We gave them all the gears and everything. We go all around the island and try to spot those. We do regular simulation exercises for flood or all the extreme events, but yet we see casualties on the ground. So how we're going to do that, how we're going to embrace it, it is the big problem and the big question.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Okwena France from Lesotho. I work for Med Service also. Is an emerging subject of discussion on including indigenous people and local communities in our daily work. Not bringing what we think is the best, but also learning from the knowledge systems that are already there, and understanding that that system can also complement what the science does not have answers for. For example, in Lesotho, we have traditional beliefs, which sometimes, as we come with a warning system, might not work because of traditional beliefs. Each year we have the boys would go for initiation schools. When they come back during their graduation, they normally celebrate with songs and things like that. If there is a convective cloud coming towards where they are, they always they would make it pass by, or when it gets there, it's just a normal rain because it is associated with lightning, and we believe that lightning does not occur naturally; it's man-made. So they make sure that the cloud will not reach them. So that's a knowledge which we have not yet understood, or we have not yet been able to explain it scientifically. But those are things which may complement our science, and so that we become effective, and we make sure that we deliver services that would protect people. Because we should be, we have to notice that these people have been living, they have been coping with extreme weather events in the past, even without the air warning systems that we are bringing. So there's a knowledge system that already exists, which we have to make sure that we incorporate in our science knowledge that we are bringing. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nico Crusoe from the South African Weather Service. I would just like to throw a spanner in the works a little bit, hopefully not too extreme. One of the first things that we need to realize, I just came out of a project which finished recently between South Africa, Mozambique, and Zambia. And I hope the directors are here. I see Edson and Conde just arrived. About the rollout of early warnings, and especially through nowcasting. And we've learned quite a number of lessons, and the panel have highlighted a lot of them. Language being the first one, that people don't understand meteorological terminology in their own language. And then also about the dissemination channels. Just one spanner that I would like to throw in. Everybody uses cellular mobile phones. During a real emergency, it's a difficult thing to utilize a mobile phone because the networks are inundated with everybody climbing on the network. And you have to revert back to what we call low-tech measures, like a loud hailer or a flag, or as we've heard, door-to-door, knocking on doors, methods of distributing the message. But what I would like to introduce also is impact-based forecasting. And my colleague next to me from head of the forecasters, we will butt heads. But the fact impact-based forecasting is not the golden nugget when it comes to early warnings and the saving of lives. It does play a role, but you have to support it with what we call nowcasting, which is a term we use in meteorology for forecasting on the time period of 0 to 2, or we stretched it to 0 to 6 hours. That is the weather that you feel on your backside. And that is the type of weather that kills people. It's not what happens tomorrow. Yes, that is sensitizing you what is going to happen in the long term. But it's what happens within the next couple of hours that save lives. And we have got a full hall of displays of radar companies. And radars is the tool, the go-to tool in order to do those forecasts. But radars are not available over the whole African continent. And that is why satellite is playing a secondary role, but very important as well. Because in instances, nowcasting is also not the golden nugget, but the two combined is basically what will be saving lives. And unfortunately, the reason, you know, my colleague and I will butt heads is the fact that it will require additional resources to conduct that nowcasting. From the Zambian Met Service and the Mozambique Met Service, the lessons we've learned is that it requires additional resources. Even within a well resourced organization, as far as forecasters is concerned, the South African Weather Service even struggles to conduct a proper methodology of nowcasting. So I just want to put that forward as well. Thank you.
Good morning. The name is Jerry. Thanks for the very practical insights. I think my experience has been working at a policy level globally and regionally and locally. And we often, I think, make assumptions when we develop those policies and technical programs with the expectation that they get rolled out and they get implemented, which is, call it a top-down. So it's been refreshing to work on the heat waves project that Planact was referring to as some examples where at a local community level, the dynamics are very, very different. The interpretation, very, very different of what is expected at an international level, at a policy level. So some of the insights you provided, very, very helpful. I have two questions. One is linked to the last one, comment from Nico, which is when you do a door-to-door, how do you translate a cut of law to the person that you're giving a warning to? Because the recent experience with Tata was that the warnings were issued, and everybody says that. And of course, the Weather Service did issue the forecast. But the reality is that 100 people lost their lives, the system hit in the evening, or the flash floods were in the evening when they were asleep. So how do you, and I know that's an extreme event, that's very rare. So it's often very difficult, maybe it talks to the question of nowcasting. How do you do a door-to-door at 12 midnight? The other question that I have then is so that's the first one, is how do you translate that language? And the second one is linked. Someone spoke about the vulnerability of communities, the risk assessment at community level. The question is, where do you retain that data? So both the translations of the information, where is the repository for that, so that those that come after you can learn from that. The second one is, where do those where's the repository for the databases, for the community vulnerability and their risk assessments, which are done at a very, very local level. That information is often lost in the system. But if there's a way, in fact, the question is that accessible? And if so, how? And then I think, I like some of the innovation, for example, around affinity programs at community level, where there's benefit accruing to the community for being part of a proactive disaster management intervention. And I think it opens the gateway for other forms of interventions like parametric insurance and so forth at that level of a community for making choices. So thanks for those insights.
Would any of our panelists like to respond to those questions?
Yes, thank you, Kerry, and maybe I can respond one or two, and my colleagues will respond to the others. The issue of culture from Lesotho, I think is already alluded to, and we just need to create more awareness to those communities. I know in some other communities, even when such disasters occur, some communities will say, okay, everybody else can move, but me as the head of this family, I'll stay around to check what goes on, which is still a big problem. So I think by creating awareness and constantly speaking to these communities, we might be able to achieve something. Then Group Play mentioned about cellular technology and how sometimes in terms of emergencies, this can come down. Yeah, I think we need to move on in Africa to the latest technologies. I am aware of discussions involving trying to move our telecoms to cell broadcast technology, where even when the systems are not working, when you are off network, your gadgets will still be able to provide you some kind of warning. And we know this happens in most of the developed countries. I think we need to move this sort of technology to the African continent. And I'm aware of 2 or 3 countries that are moving in this direction. The others, I will let my colleagues respond to them. Thank you.
I think the question that really stuck with me was the one about Mthatha, because Red Cross was actively involved in the response in Mthatha. I think we went there just a few hours after the disaster had occurred. And door-to-door does not work in the event of a flood of that nature, especially occurring early hours or during the night. That also exposed a gap for us, but it also highlighted the fact that communities have freedom of action. And even when the early warning comes in during the day, when communities are able to move, you still need to acknowledge the fact that communities aren't just recipients of the message. They still have the freedom to act. And you're going into that community with the likes of your government counterparts, your ward councillors, to deliver that message. And you're delivering this message to communities who are already on floodplains, so they are at high risk. They've been prompted to move in several different occasions, but now the disaster happens and they are still amongst those floodplains. And what you need to acknowledge is that communities still have the freedom to act or not act. So we made evacuation centers available and also advised on the different pathways. But during the event of that disaster, where there are no volunteers on the ground, there are no ward councillors on the ground, it's just the community and that disaster, then you have to go in and you're going in at a time once that disaster has already occurred. Because the ones who could act or who had the willingness to act did act, and the ones who remained behind are the ones that, as a humanitarian organization, you are left to respond to. So for that also, I think in those instances, there's always learning lessons. They will always expose gaps in the tools and the systems that we operate in. But from that, you take the lesson and you readapt to the different contexts that we find ourselves in. So as soon as I heard the word Mthatha, it took us back to when we're still responding. We're still going back on a weekly basis to respond, because there's almost nothing left that's left in that village because of the severity of that flood. And then there was another question on, but I think I answered that. I think it was a note from my colleague in Lesotho, yes, where there's a difference between an early warning coming out as level 6 orange inclement weather to protect your steel sheet roofs, because that community only has informal houses like shacks. So there's a difference in the messaging. Even if the message is in English, there's a difference between saying level 6 orange inclement, those very technical terms, to saying, protect your documents, there's a flood that is coming. So I think that's the difference that we appreciate with impact-based forecasting, because it doesn't just tell you what the weather is, it tells you what you need to do, or it guides rather, what you need to do in the event of that weather. So I think those are the two questions that really struck me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think what was really interesting to hear was these emergencies that happen without any warning, and that one really is just a matter of hours to respond and to act, and what then do you put in place in those instances. And I think that's a very difficult question to ask, because things happen all the time, and it's very difficult somehow to really know what infrastructure is around. And typically then, of course, it's local governments and how well equipped they are then to assist in those instances when there are no other organizations. So I think that is something that really needs a lot more thinking. Useful to also hear about the satellite technology, because we tend to be very, we use WhatsApp messaging typically, and that requires data, and it also, of course, when there's a calamity, of course, that might be knocked out. And again, I would agree that door-to-door is not necessarily when there's an emergency unfolding. I think what really has to be in place then, of course, is what kicks in. And so the messaging needs to be very much around where to go to, what are those points that are available in the instances. So people really need to be well aware ahead of time. And so messaging really needs to include that type of information, so useful, actionable information regarding what to do. I think it's also very important to understand particularly seasonality and geographic conditions. So of course not all places are the same, and so really understanding where are those places of vulnerability. And also again, very contextual, very in one settlement, for instance, there might be more. So I think that mapping is essential. And again, seasonality. With heat, I mean, typically you have a pre-season, during the season, and then of course post, and really aligning for those instances. But I think well aware, having those places of where people can go to once the emergency is underway, because it simply isn't there isn't time to do.
A couple. On the first comment regarding Mauritius, it made me think about sort of proactive versus reactive approaches to early warning systems. And one of the things we commonly see is community members being trained as first responders, and basically playing a role in 2 of the 4 components of your early warning system: your communication and your action. And what we are trying to do, especially through our community risk management model, is to show that they have a place in all 4 components. And so they need to be part of the data collection to develop the risk profile. They also need to be part of the monitoring, so they can monitor indicators in their own communities, and they can understand what the thresholds are, so that they can take, be part of the process of creating those alerts and then communicating and responding. By doing this, you go beyond just creating awareness to actually internalizing the risk, and that's where you want your communities to be, because once that internalization of risk will immediately trigger behavior change, and that's really important if one wants to see a real impact of your early warnings. Nico, on your comment on the communication, I learned that the hard way. When we did our evacuation drills in Limpopo with these communities in the mining sector, we were relying heavily on mobile communication, phone calls and WhatsApp. But very quickly realized that the network in that area was absolute rubbish. So we had to, in the moment, default to runners, to backup radios, even traditional instruments. So in the Limpopo region, and some of you may be aware of it, is using the chibi, which is your metal instrument hanging from the tree that your leader will, gong, 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 and it alerts community members to mobilize quickly and come and hear what the message is. So we even had to default to that. But that also speaks to the agility of, how agile your early warning system needs to be, because we could take those findings and update our emergency management plan to incorporate those sort of backup communication requirements. And then I'll just touch on, Jerry, you mentioned about the data. Very interesting, because as it is right now, there's so little capacity, especially in the local government where you really need the data to be, there's a lot of, especially disaster management don't even have GIS experts or, systems to support the risk profiles of those areas. So that's so part of community risk management is we've got fantastic partners on board. We've got Bayotree that are going to be supporting on the data collection side. So we collect data through this very easy to use application through mobile phone or tablet. And then we are creating what we're calling a knowledge warehouse, where all the data that we collect is going to be centralized there. And we are actually in the process of building the architecture and making sure we link that with the data collection system. And then very importantly, our next step will be to understand what are our user needs. So whether you're from the agricultural sector, health sector, private sector, local government, what data do you need and in what format do you need it and what do you need to use it for, so that we can be able to package that data and be able to share it accordingly. So that is our vision, and that basically is going to hopefully assist the current gap in terms of data within government anyway.
I would tackle a solution to a door-to-door kind of communication, and I will base my contribution on a practical issue that occurred in Malawi. As one of the colleagues has already alluded, the backup to the networks is a private mobile radio. I understand in some areas, Red Cross has procured some private mobile radios for communication, mainly when we have problems with the networks. And again, in a very remote area where accessing to the data and information is very difficult. But apart from the manual gadgets that were presented, like flags and the like, there is also an introduction of sirens, standalone sirens in the broad areas, so that when the alert has been initiated and communication has been done, then one of those local members would trigger an alarm through the siren. But that will only work after the awareness campaign has been done before the installation, so that everybody is aware what happens when he hears the siren. And I tend to understand that in those broad areas, there are evacuation centers, which means each time the community gets the alert through the sirens, and then they evacuate to those evacuation centers. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Oops. Awesome. Well, so much insight's been shared from you all. I wanted to thank you. Our panel has been really incredible. For me, I'm always reminded that this is why we're here, is to share and learn. But it sort of doesn't end with the panel here. There will be opportunities for roundtables, right, coming up today. So let's continue the sharing and learning. It's absolutely paramount to the overall mission, which I think in various ways we all share and that we're all passionate about. So unless there's anything urgent from the panel, I just want to say thank you so much to all 5 of you and for bringing your perspectives and being up here first thing in the morning and getting us going today. Thank you.
I'd like to add my thanks to the panelists and also to Ari for moderating. It's now break time. Please do go out, get some refreshments and some fresh air. I invite you to be back for 11 o'clock for our morning presentations. Thank you.